The Canon EOS 30D came out in 2006. It's an 8 megapixel crop sensor DSLR. And you might be wondering, why would anyone use this today? In this video, I'm going to explain why I use the Canon EOS 30D nowadays, even though I have a mirrorless camera as well. And I'm also going to share some pictures that I've taken with it so that you can see what it's capable of. Even though this is quite an old camera, this is in fact the second Canon DSLR body that I've owned. And I'll say so from the get-go, it's my favorite. The first thing that I like about the Canon EOS 30D is the bright viewfinder, which is a big upgrade from the previous Canon camera I had. It makes taking pictures and composing your shot very much a treat. Now I should back up a bit. About 4 years ago, I wanted to get back into photography, but also get a camera that I'd be able to use to shoot videos for this YouTube channel. So I chose the Canon EOS 700D, or Rebel T5i as it's known in the States. And in hindsight, that wasn't the best choice. At the same time, I didn't know any better at the time, and it was one of the cameras that was available back then. The first thing that frustrated me about the 700D was the viewfinder. It was somewhat cramped and dark, and that really took away some of my enthusiasm about going out and getting back into photography. So I ended up using it mostly for video, for shooting videos on this channel. Now, another thing worth mentioning about the 30D, something that I also like, especially when compared to the lower range Canons, is the fact that you have both a dial here at the top, very nice and clicky, but then also a control wheel here on the back. And basically, with those two control points, I'm able to set most of the things that I need when taking pictures, and that's great. It's the Canon way of doing things, but it works. So I appreciate it for that. So I mainly shoot in aperture priority mode, and this means that the top dial here sets the aperture, and then the control wheel here at the back sets either the exposure or ISO if I choose to change the ISO as well. Now, a testament to this camera's ergonomics and design is the fact that I was able to essentially pick it up and start taking pictures without really needing to delve into a manual. Granted, I had used the 700D, but this does have a different menu system, it's from a different era, but I still felt very much at home taking pictures with it. So another thing that I like about the Canon EOS 30D are in fact the menus. The earlier style of menu, I find it very retro. I like the aesthetics of it, the grey background and the font. But also, it's very simple to use. I just basically need to go in and set the color temperature, and that's really the only thing that I need to go into for the menus. Everything else I can just use the dials or view in the viewfinder or in the top LCD display here. So the body is made, I believe, of a magnesium alloy, and what this translates as is that it just feels a lot sturdier, as I've already mentioned. I notice this specifically when I mount some heavier lenses. Well, I only really have one lens that is relatively heavy. It's this 17 to 55 millimeter f2.8 zoom. When I would put this on the 700D, sometimes I would hear a creak or feel something. Now, nothing bad happened, it worked fine, but it didn't inspire me with confidence. Meanwhile, putting this lens on the 30D, no problem. It feels like they're made for each other. Another bonus point for the 30D is the fact that the grip is deeper than its Rebel line siblings. So it's it feels really good in the hand. Feels like you can hold it securely. And then also here on the back, there is this sort of ridge here on the top right corner where the zoom and focus point select buttons are. And you can put your thumb just behind it, and it just feels very secure in the hand. Now, before I get into the downsides, or rather limitations of using an older camera like this, I'd like to talk about the screens. So you have this top LCD panel here, where you just have some basic information. I don't use it that much, but it's handy to set the ISO or to view what the ISO is, and then also some basic aperture and exposure compensation settings. So that I do appreciate that, even though I probably don't use it to its full potential. So the back screen here seems serviceable enough, I would say, but it's worth noting that the resolution is fairly limited. It's 320 by 240. I actually had to read that twice because I was quite surprised. And I don't know if it's because the camera's now getting old, or maybe it was just how the screen was made, but my copy at least seems to have a little bit of a color tint when previewing pictures. But basically this back screen is useful to check that you took the picture, that it's of what you wanted composition-wise, but anything beyond that, you really need to bring the images into the computer to make further judgments. Okay, so now we come to the key question of image quality. It's an important question, but also it needs to be looked at in the context of when this camera came out. The technology has been completely superseded by cameras that have come since, but that doesn't mean that this camera isn't capable of taking good pictures. Well, when it came out, I believe that this camera was towards the higher range of the APS-C lineup that Canon had at the time, so photographers used it successfully. Now, having said that, as you can see from the pictures that I've shared, these are generally shot in decent lighting, and that's because once you start bumping up the ISO even to what nowadays will be considered intermediate levels, you start getting color noise that creeps in. In fact, in some of the pictures that I'm showing you, if I zoom into the raw file, I can see that color noise. Now, the good news is that just with a little bit of noise reduction, that goes away, and it doesn't impact the quality of the image in any noticeable way. Now, in addition, the 8 megapixel sensor puts out an image that at maximum resolution reaches 3504 by 2336, which means that I'm not really going to do a lot of cropping in post. However, I am still pleased with how far I can push the CR2 RAW files that come out of this camera. These are 12-bit RAW files, both in terms of exposure and color. I feel that I have, generally speaking, enough latitude to really get the creative look that I want to realize with the image. One of the unintended benefits of the 8 megapixel sensor is the size of the RAW files that it produces. So the average RAW file is anywhere between 8 megabytes and 10 megabytes a piece. And I don't know how, but essentially that's the same size as the processed JPEG with a quality slider at 100%. So I find that I can archive all of the RAW files in Apple Photos. I just drop them in there. While with my mirrorless camera, the Fujifilm X-T4, the RAW files are much larger, and I end up just processing the JPEGs and keeping those. That's just me. I mean, of course, professional photographers, have storage and everything, but just someone who's an amateur and who just is doing photography for my own enjoyment, having a bunch of 30 to 40 megabyte RAW files in my photo archive isn't really feasible in the long term. So I do like the fact that weirdly the raw files that come out of the 30D are very compact, and I can keep them in Apple Photos. I edit them and essentially keep them in Apple Photos. That's sufficient for me, except maybe in some extreme cases I might take it to Affinity Photo and then get the JPEG out of that. But for the most part, I'm very happy with how Apple Photos handles the Canon RAW files coming out of the 30D. It's funny because the pictures that I'm showing you are all essentially shot in decent light. But when I was preparing for this video, I checked out the DP review of the Canon EOS 30D from when it came out. And one of the plus points that the reviewer pointed to was the fact that the 30D had decent low light performance, I guess, for 2006. So maybe something that I'd like to try out is to actually take the 30D into low light photography settings and see what I can get out of it. If that's something that interests you, let me know in the comments, and I'll see what I can do. I hope that between my ramblings and the pictures that I've been sharing, you've gotten an idea that of what this camera can do, and that, if you have one, or if you have a camera from that era, you can still take it out and take some nice pictures. Thank you so much for watching today. If you've enjoyed the video, then I would very much appreciate it if you'd give it a like and consider subscribing. Until next time, stay safe and have a good one.